Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. This episode could save your life. It could save the life of someone you know. South Asian communities around the world are facing an alarming rise in heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, etc., etc., etc. And it's not just older people, it's young people too. People who are fit, who are thin, and have no family history. I had no symptoms. I watched what I ate and yet I discovered that one of my arteries was 95% blocked. I was lucky to catch it before it was too late, but most people don't. Doctors told me it was bad genes, something common among South Asians, but it's much more than that. Our health risks aren't just about diet or lifestyle, they're about the history our ancestors survived. My guest today is Dr. Mubin Syed, author of Healing from Our History. Together, we're exploring the roots of this crisis, how the past still lives in our bodies, and what we can do to finally take control of our health. It's such an important episode and an important book. Dr. Mubin Said himself had a heart attack. Like me, he was told it was genetics. So he hasn't just researched this, he's lived it, and he's still living it because this is a forever thing. You can't run away from your genes. You can check out his Instagram page at desidoc.md, which I've tagged on the post. He's constantly sharing powerful tips, history lessons, and insights on South Asian health and heritage. Before we get to it, if you're enjoying the Brown Sheep podcast and you find it meaningful, you find it important, do consider being a Patreon. There's many other ways to support us. You can be a subscriber. You can check out our merch. Anything you do goes a long, long way. And thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And let's get this started. Thank you so much for coming on. This is such an important episode. I think this could be by far the most important episode I've recorded because there are a lot of
Wow.
people who need to understand this. I got your book a while ago, but it was in my bookshelf for a while. And then 3 weeks ago, I got two stents in me. I'm 30 years
Oh,
old. Yeah.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
So the doctor said I was 95%, my artery was 95% blocked. And
Yeah.
I had no symptoms. I'm not overweight. I think I'm pretty good shape.
Yes, yes.
I ate healthy. I was careful.
Yep.
But when I asked the doctor why, he's like bad genetics. People from your background are known to have this issue.
Yeah.
And this
It
super
it sort of mimics my story,
yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Except I'm a physician who's supposed to know these things. And I thought I knew these things, but I thought I was being careful.
For people who don't know your story, you were in your 50s and you had a heart
Yeah,
attack.
early 50s. I thought I was being healthy. I was exercising. I was, not super overweight. My risk score was low by Western standards. There's a standard risk calculator for 10-year, ASCVD or atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. My risk score was low. And lo and behold, I had a heart attack. I mean, I wasn't diabetic. I was not a smoker,
Yeah, me
and I had
neither.
a heart attack, a big one, by the way.
Yeah.
And no family history either, by the way.
Wow. So very scary. The doctor said that one of the most significant signs of a heart attack is a heart attack. For many
Hmm.
people, it's too late.
Yes, that's the first warning of there's a
Yeah.
problem, unfortunately, and that's actually the first warning is death for unfortunately a lot of people,
Yeah.
and young
Um,
people, by the way, who
yeah,
are of South Asian origin.
and I'm 38. Luckily I was proactive and I went to the doctor and I said I want to get my heart checked and I wanted to
Hmm.
make sure
Hmm.
and he just happens to see that it's 95% blocked and he's like, okay, since we have you here, we need to put in two stents. And now
Yeah.
I'm on pills for the rest of my life, pretty much, and
Hmm.
I have to be careful what I eat. And every pain in my body, I get super paranoid and scared that this is it. This is
Yeah.
the day I'm gonna get a heart attack. I think this is a good segue. If you can explain to us some of the data and numbers out there for South Asians, what is the health crisis that we're dealing with here that we don't talk
Yes.
about, and how bad is it?
Right. This is something that the UN has, the United Nations World Health Organization, it's designated a health crisis for South Asians. Yet it's not very well publicized or known. But people of South Asian origin have huge rates of diabetes, heart disease and diabetes are very serious diseases, and they can literally kill you at young ages. So there was a study called the Masala study that was done by Dr. Kanaya in the United States. It stands for Mediators of Atherosclerosis in South Asians Living in America. And it showed that South Asian Americans had a type 2 diabetes prevalence of 23%, approximately 23%, compared to the rest of the population, which was 6% in, like, for instance, white populations.
Hmm. This
That's
is this is the
almost,
whole world. This is not just India. This is
yeah, but it's
America,
prevalent
Canada.
throughout the world also. I mean, this is actually in America. These are people who are part of the diaspora from South Asia.
Hmm.
The rates are like almost quadruple or even higher depending on where you do it. In the UK, it's sometimes stated it's 4 to 5 times higher. Canada, similar to that. And they also, South Asians develop it at much younger ages, 10 years younger. In fact, unlike for the rest of the population, where screening for diabetes is suggested at age 45, for South Asians, the International Diabetes Federation is suggesting at age 35 and perhaps even younger.
Wow.
Um, and that's for diabetes. Heart disease, similar. Same thing, 4 times the rate compared to the general population for South Asian origin. And people are dying younger. People in their, I mean, 30s are getting heart attacks. And if they're fortunate, they get stents. If they're unlucky, they die suddenly. And that's the first symptom they'll be having. I mean, you don't even know that you're having any symptoms until your first heart attack. And these are very severe, can be very severe heart attacks. The severity of the disease in diabetes and heart disease is more severe. So it's a crisis, and I'm trying to spread the word that it's not awareness is key, but prevention is possible if you can start young enough, and even avoiding secondary events is also possible if you're able to be careful and change the course of what you were doing before.
Wow.
And I'm an example of that myself. You know,
Yeah.
I had my heart attack several years ago, and I mean, knock on wood, I'm taking the right medications. I've really lowered my cardiovascular risk profile. I'm doing a lot of things differently for lifestyle and medications that allow me to be healthy, or I shouldn't say healthy, but like survive and thrive.
So if you understand this crisis, there is hope at the end.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Just having, I think the key thing is to be aware, to not to feel shamed, not to realize that you shouldn't just be feeling guilty. There's an external factor here, which is our sad history. And I wanted people to know about that as part of the reason that we are in this predicament.
After I got my stents done, the doctor said that the recommended amount of cardio walking that you have to do is 150 minutes per week, something like that. But then he
Hmm.
says this is a figure that's applied to white people. For
Yes.
you, for South Asians, I have no idea how much you have to walk. There's not enough data out there. We have to do this like trial and error thing, and we have to see how you much you walk and if you're getting better or not. And to me, that just blew my mind that all these figures that I was taught here in Canada, where I'm based, all these
Yeah.
figures I taught about health and what to eat and what not to eat, how much I can eat, the bare minimum, the max, all this
Hmm.
information is applied to a certain community, and I'm not part of that community.
Yes. And that's the tragedy of it. The research has not been done specifically for South Asian populations, even though we're in the world, we account for about 1 out of every 4 human beings. There's
Yeah.
hardly any research for us. And but I will say, for one thing, there has been some relatively small studies that have been done focused on South Asians specifically for exercise. And they did find that because of our predispositions, or we actually need more exercise than the general population. In fact, instead of 150 minutes, it's recommended 232 to 266 minutes at least. And by the way, the more the better.
Yeah. Wow.
So almost double
And
to
that
maintain the
that
same amount of health.
that's what we know. There's probably a lot more we don't know, like how much food we can eat and how much food we can
Yes,
handle and how much fasting we need to do, like all these little things.
right. I
Okay.
mean, there needs to be studies on because our physiology is different. We probably need less calories than we think we do compared to the standard, in America, it's called the ADA recommendations. It's different. Enough research has not been done.
Your book, Healing from Our History, is it's a fascinating book. It's a very important book. I think it should be taught to every kid because not only do you get history lessons, but you also get like a health understanding of your health and better awareness.
Thank you so much. I'm
And
honored that you say that.
and it basically traces our health problems back to colonialism, back when
hmm
the British ruled India. But before we get
Yeah.
into that, can you explain to us what is the concept of epigenetics and how does that work? And can you explain to in like non-medical terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So epigenetics is the science of how life experiences can affect the way that your genes, your DNA behave without changing the actual DNA or the code itself. So if you can think of your DNA as the hardware, the physical blueprint, epigenetics is the software. It's the settings that tell your body which genes to turn on, which genes to turn off, or turn up, depending
Hmm.
on the environment. So if your ancestors lived through extreme stress, like famine, starvation, trauma, their bodies learned survival strategies. For example, the gene involved in storing fat, processing sugar, or responding to stress might get dialed up. And here's the key. Those settings can be passed down to subsequent or next following generations. So you inherit not just your grandparents' genes, but some of their survival instructions also. It's in modern life, the problem is when food is abundant and stress looks very different, those same survival adaptations can work against us. And it causes diabetes, heart disease, and metabolic issues, even in people like us who look relatively thin and healthy. So, epigenetics is basically about how history lives inside your body.
Wow.
It's how our biology remembers what our ancestors went through because it's critically crucial for our bodies, in other normal environments, when they're the same, it's very beneficial, but the problem is we're living through a drastically changed environment because of the modern world.
It's basically inheriting trauma in a
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, or adaptations to trauma.
Let's you kind of already explained it, but I thought it'd be cool if we kind of explain the health issues that you mentioned and then kind of trace us back to the era of colonialism and see what were the factors and the stress and the trauma that our ancestors
Yeah.
went through and how
hmm
they developed this change and passed it down to us. First, let's get a broad history of our past and then let's get deeper into I would say diabetes and heart issues and any other things you can think
Yeah.
of.
No problem. Yeah. And I did also want to make sure that everyone understood that it's an established science. We're just uncovering its deeper implications in human history and health and applying it to public health now. But
It's not an emerging theory.
it's not
This is a sure
exactly.
thing.
It's
This is
it's a
not
sure it's pretty I mean, we've known for decades that genes can be turned on and off by the environment, not just in human beings, but also, of course, in animals, stress, nutrition, and epigenetic mechanisms are central to cancer biology, to brain development, immune responses, pregnancy, and even how medications work. Um, and when you know, it's what's emerging though is applying it to public health and history, and that's kind of what's also only recently been done because of we're learning how these marks can affect generations and how big their effects are in different populations. But it's not speculative science, is what I'm saying.
yeah.
So yes, looking at history, you know, South Asian health today, to understand it, you really have to look back. And in the last few thousand years, South Asian history included long periods of agricultural stability. Um, South Asia traditionally produced in more than enough food for itself. Even during colonial times, by the way, it actually exported large amounts of food. It just wasn't provided for the people who were growing it,
Yeah.
sadly. Um, and Prior to colonialism, there was like community-based food systems. There was some seasonal fasting, but also there was some cycles of drought and hardship. But populations were able to adapt to it naturally, and they had systems to store food, for instance, during times of scarcity. But then what happened was that when colonialism arrived, the story changed dramatically. Beginning in the mid 1700s, British rule reshaped the economy, agriculture, and food systems. Land was now reorganized for cash crops, tea, cotton, opium, indigo, in addition to grains for export, but not for local food as much. Traditional grain reserves, where they stored grains, were dismantled. Taxes were collected in a way that stripped rural communities of safety nets. And famine wasn't just a rare tragedy, it became a recurring reality. Historians estimate in between the late 1700s and mid 1900s, South Asia experienced over 25 major famines under colonial rule, some of the worst in documented human history. There was a study that was recently done by a guy named, I think, Dillon and Hickel. They're economic historians. 100 and up to 100, at least, I shouldn't say up to, let me just say they're estimating between 100 to 165 million excess deaths under colonial rule between
Wow.
1880 and 1920 alone in a 40-year span, based on the death rates that they were seeing recorded. Um, so millions, tens of millions of pregnant women, children, and entire communities lived under chronic undernutrition, even outside the famine years. And our ancestors basically lived through these cycles of starvation, stress, infection, and survival pressure that shaped our biology and our bodies. And after independence now, South Asia experienced rapid urbanization, processed food introduction, sedentary work, and different stress levels. And this was layered on our biology that was built for scarcity. So you have this, this history of like stable agriculture, long agricultural tradition with ancient adaptations, colonial disruption, recurrent famines, and forced food system changes. And then after colonialism, a transition to modern life, diaspora, globalized diets, sedentary stresses, lack of physical labor.
So let's go really specific into some examples. Like let's say like
Mhm.
high blood pressure is an issue for me and I have to take a high blood pressure pill.
Yeah,
And
right.
I'm skinny. I was working out. I was eating healthy.
Mhm.
How is it possible that I have high blood pressure?
Right, right. I mean, it's surprising, right? Um, so, for thousands of years, South Asians lived in these rich agricultural societies, and I would mention that South Asia was at one of the, in fact, the richest or most wealthiest region in the world, with 25% of the world's GDP. They were exporters to the world, and they were leaders in technology, education, science, all of that. Great stuff. Um, and then, unfortunately, you know, because of colonialism, um, all of this land that grew these diverse grains and vegetables were diverted to just cash crops for 200 years. But what happens is that our bodies became, to survive this, are started really good at storing energy as fat, holding on to glucose, lowering metabolism under stress, prioritizing, survival over muscle growth. And, these are, and increasing your inflammatory responses to fight infection. These were not flaws, but genius survival adaptations. Now, with regard to high blood pressure, this is actually part of a syndrome of this adaptation. called metabolic syndrome. It's one of the features that
Hmm.
we have. It's like a tetrad of a lot of internal body fat, and it's manifested by altered lipids, uh, pre-diabetes, and high blood pressure. And this is, in the modern world, it becomes dysfunctional. But it was, when it's in a world of scarcity, it's very functional because this is what helps you survive a famine by storing this fat inside your body.
So our bodies right now are not meant to eat so much, basically.
Right. That's the issue. I mean, they're meant to be, and even the quality of the food is also crucial. And also the amount of physical activity that our bodies are now enduring, or I shouldn't say enduring, but are subjected to is much, much less than what they can tolerate for health. Um, and at the same time, huge amounts of stress that is part of the being part of the modern workforce. This is and lack of sleep, by the way, because of
Yeah.
the stress oftentimes, or just our work schedules. It's really terrible on our bodies.
After the surgery, I'm now worried about what I don't know. And we
Hmm.
spoke about the heart a lot and arteries and things like that, but what about the brain and the mind and is dementia, Alzheimer's, are they somehow connected? Is there something we need to know about in that area of the body?
So it's a similar situation. South Asians are now experiencing higher rates of vascular dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and vascular dementia is from blood vessel disease and diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease from inflammation and met metabolic dysfunction. But dementia isn't just a brain disease, it's often a metabolic disease that reaches the brain. So some people will actually, scientists are starting to call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. In some cases,
Wow.
insulin resistance, the insulin resistance affects the brain's ability to use energy and clear waste proteins. And so the same history shaped traits that predispose us to diabetes and heart disease, basically inflammation, stress, also affect your ability to think and your mental health later in life.
Wow, I that is frightening.
Yeah, but it's preventable. I think the key is like yourself, we just all have to be careful. We have to change the trajectory of how we were living our lives. And it's possible, I believe, to beat this.
What about the expression, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger? Is there something positive in our genetic inheritance? Is there something we won?
Yes, I think that's a great question. It's basically, uh, it's not about weakness. It's about survival strength. When we say our ancestors lived through famine, disease, displacement, colonial trauma, remember that they survived it. And so that resilience doesn't disappear, it lives within us. And these are positives in our genetic and epigenetic inheritance. We have a very efficient metabolism. Our bodies can thrive on nutrient-dense food and function incredibly well without constant snacking. We have a very strong inflammatory response. So environments with infection and hardship, this was protection. It helps our ancestors fight disease. Adaptability, we are biologically wired to endure stress and scarcity, which is partly, I think, why South Asians succeed in demanding academic and professional environments.
Mm.
Mental grit, resilience and perseverance, the work ethic. I think these are survival traits that are passed through culture and biology. So, you know, I do think that these traits can actually become superpowers, not liabilities.
It's just how you see it, right?
Yes, I think we just have to use our strength intentionally instead of fighting our biology. Our inheritance is not a curse. It's a survival gift to, you just have to learn to, use it in the modern world.
Do you think there's an emotional baggage here? I mean, with this trauma that our ancestors had to adapt through, do you think
Yeah.
certain behavior issues, mental illnesses that have passed down or developed since then, anxiety, paranoia, things like
Yeah,
that?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, there is some strong evidence that emotional trauma can be passed down biologically, not just culturally. They've done studies on Holocaust survivors that show that they can have these epigenetic changes in stress response genes in their children, by the way, who didn't endure the Holocaust.
Wow.
And similarly, research from the Dutch and Chinese famines have found these epigenetic changes also that translate to higher rates of not just metabolic disease, but also mood disorders in the descendants generations later. And even early studies in findings from the Bangladesh famine, partition affected families also in 1947 show similar patterns of anxiety, stress reactivity, and there's been done some research on the refugee populations, like from Cambodia, that also shows that there's can be some alterations in with these effects transmitted to future generations. So I do think that South Asians carry some inherited stress biology in addition to the famine adapted metabolism. But I do think that it's possible to heal from this through community, through addressing it, meditation also, and community support, and,
Wow.
and and also being aware that this can happen.
This is such
Awareness.
an this is such an important thing to know. It's so surprising that we aren't taught this as kids. When I went to the doctor, I've been doing blood tests all the time, and then after this incident, he's like, "You have high LPA," and I'm like, "What is
Hmm.
LPA?" It's the genetic part of the bad cholesterol that you can't do anything about.
Yes,
And I wanted to know why didn't you tell me, why didn't somebody tell me this beforehand, that I had a genetic portion in me that would make eating sugar and gaining weight more riskier and more damaging for me. Like that is something that should be like a red flag for you to tell you like, hey, turns out that when you eat sugar, it hits you harder than your white friends. But no one told me
100%
this. No one
true.
mentioned
Yes,
this. It's not part of the process. It's only after this that they tell me this. And
right. It's so unfair. I
yes, it's
think
so
that
unfair.
my goal is to let people know before it happens. Yes, you're completely right. Sugar affects our body very, very differently than it would a white Caucasian of European heritage.
Yeah.
Um, and similarly, lipoprotein A, I have the same problem. My lipoprotein A is sky high. Um, and it's something that's seen at very high rates in South Asian. But I mean, in my evaluation and my research, I have come to understand that it was again, a survival strategy. This was a way that our bodies, it helped us survive the famines by avoiding scurvy.
What should South Asians do right now? What should they know when they go to the doctor now? And like, how can they find out if they have these so-called bad genes?
Hmm. Okay. So, definitely you need to get screened, even if you're thin, at young ages. I mean, I'm talking about, early 30s uh, to mid 30s, and even sooner if you have a strong family history, by the way.
Yeah.
And if you have risk factors for these conditions, I'm talking about diabetes and heart disease, but you should ask your physician for screenings at younger ages than what it's the general recommendations.
What kind of screening?
A1C, hemoglobin A1C levels for diabetes, getting your lipids checked, even checking your insulin levels, liver enzymes, vitamin D levels, vitamin B12 level, uh, getting your lipoprotein A level, like you mentioned, the small a level,
LPA.
getting your homocysteine levels, your C-reactive protein levels. You need to tell your physician that South Asians develop metabolic disease at lower body weights and earlier ages, even if they appear thin. But even you don't need to confirm these bad genes. I mean, there's really not a way to test our genetics for this. But knowing your family history, that's really important. checking your waist circumference because we tend to store fat in our bellies. Um, and we don't have as much of a margin, like a South Asian, sorry, a person who's of European ancestry, they don't develop metabolic syndrome until their waist circumference is around 40 inches. For South Asians, it's closer to 35 for a male, for instance.
It's basically a dad bod. Like
Yes,
it's like
it's
unfair.
right, right. And so, the key thing is to check your lipids, to check, these your blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, awareness, early testing, and proactive habits are the advantage that you can get from this.
Let's say, okay, well, I have a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old ch
Hmm.
son, two boys.
Yep.
Is there something parents can do to help them in the future when it comes to feeding them and teaching them? I mean, teaching them is an obvious one, but feeding them and like
Yeah.
building a
I think
lifestyle.
parents play a very powerful role. It's important to still instill good habits for health, and that includes diet and lifestyle at an early age, because you can shift the trajectory, avoiding bad health outcomes the earlier you start. Um, and think of like good nutrition or nourishment. Um, Prioritize whole foods, vegetables, lentils, fruit, yogurt, lean protein sources, nuts, seeds, protein at every meal, which supports your muscle and your metabolism. Avoid ultra-processed snacks and sugary drinks. Daily movement and play time,
Hmm.
active play time, not just screens. Consistent sleep routines, emotional safety, because stress regulation is inherited too. Let them eat like their grandparents, not like TikTok.
This applies to adults too. Like
Yes, it
we should be
totally
doing this
does.
now.
So
Yeah.
you're not trying to erase the history, you're trying to give them a new way of looking at things, like a new script for their biology. And kids' bodies are actually pretty adaptable. They can actually rewire or rewrite their epigenetic marks much faster than adults do. And you know, a nutrient-rich, low-stress, active, loving environment that basically tells them, you are safe, food is reliable, you can thrive, not just survive.
Food is such a big part of South Asian identity. You go to a wedding,
Yep.
you go to whatever, boom, your diet just goes out the door. How do you talk about
Yeah.
healthy eating to the South Asian community without turning people off?
The key thing I think is to try to prioritize um, eating whole foods, cutting, minimizing your. I mean, I'm not saying you should completely avoid it, but just be aware you need to probably not indulge as heavily as perhaps you see other people around you
Portion
indulging.
sizes.
Portion sizes is key. Um, and you know, I don't tell people to just stop eating anything, especially the foods that are, tied to your family and faith and memories. I don't think South Asian food is the problem. I think colonial disruption, processed modern foods, and portion distortion. That's the main issue here. Um, I think you would want to focus on how to honor your food in a more healthier way. Keep your cultural flavors, just modernize like the oil, the sugar, and the portion balance. Add more fiber and protein to the same meals. For instance, if you go there, try to eat more salad. I mean, oftentimes there's some version of salad.
Yeah,
Maybe have half your plate salad before you indulge in the heavier stuff.
yeah.
Um, you can add also things like vegetables and beans, dal and yogurt, if those items are available, lentils, chana, for instance. Treat refined carbs and roti as a base, not the whole plate. Okay. I
Yeah,
see a lot of people, unfortunately, heaping their plates with gigantic portions
yeah.
because they're at a wedding. They feel like they can eat as much as they can or want to. Um, you know, and then when you're not at these events, I mean, try to focus on these traditional environments, traditional ingredients. like turmeric, ginger, cumin, fenugreek, the dals or lentils, greens, millets, even, a lot of people don't realize that millets were the basis of South Asian agriculture. Polished rice, white rice was a British introduction. I mean, it actually caused so much disruption in the food system. People developed a disease called beriberi when white rice was introduced because it has zero nutrition. It's like eating sugar.
Yeah. People are
I
surprised
mean,
to find out that when I tell them rice is sugar.
and you can actually see this. I mean, you can get a glucose monitor over the counter and see for your own body what happens, even if you're not diabetic. When you eat, a cup of rice, it skyrockets your blood sugar. It's insane.
Yeah.
And by the way, and I would also include the fact that you want to, exercise, after you eat these meals. It's crucial, in fact. It's not a choice, in fact. I would say it's, exercise is not a choice. It's something that you need to do. And preferably do something after your meal, like walk for 15, 10, 20 minutes. That's better than not doing it.
Yeah. Brisk
Um,
walking. Like you need
brisk walking
you
is
need to get
ideal if you
you
can
need
do
to
it.
get your heart, beating a bit harder.
Yes, yes. Um, and so basically, I think you want to cook and eat like your grandparents did, not like the fast food chains. Um, you just need less processing and more tradition, I think, going back to the original roots of how our ancestors, lived. And I'm not saying, I mean, I think we should continue with our traditional foods. Just realize some of these foods are actually not so traditional as we think, like the huge amounts of white rice that we eat.
Yeah, and these processed rotis and parathas and
Yes, processed white flour, horrible for our health also.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
something like eating sugar.
yeah. Even regular potatoes isn't that good for you. Like replace it with sweet potatoes.
Yes, that would be ideal. And if you're going to eat potatoes, eat it with the skin, eat the whole thing. But again, I agree, portion control is important.
As a systematic process in the big scheme of things, how can doctors and hospitals use and understand this history to improve how they treat South Asian patients? Or I think at this point right now we're at is you need to know your own history and then you have to tell the doctor the situation you are in and you have to be smarter than the doctor in this case.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Sometimes you have to be somewhat gentle to your physician, but to kind of tell them in a relatively polite way. I mean, you want to be as polite as
Yeah, be
possible
nice, be
and
nice
respectful.
and respectful.
Um, but you, having this awareness gives you a lot of knowledge and power to change your own health and reduce the shame and guilt that you would otherwise have about your health potentially. And it means recognizing that physicians need to use this history to move from reactive care to proactive care for South Asians. In other words, prevention is much more effective than treating the problems as they occur. Um, it means recognizing that South Asians develop disease much earlier and at lower body weights, and so screening needs to start sooner, even if someone looks fit. Um, Clinicians, and I'm not just saying doctors, but nurse practitioners should be checking hemoglobin A1Cs for people in their 30s, uh, fasting insulin levels, triglyceride levels, um, and liver enzymes, vitamin D levels, vitamin B12 levels, lipoprotein small a levels, homocysteine levels, C-reactive protein. Check waist circumference based on South Asian cutoffs for health. Um, and instead of just telling patients to stop eating rice, they need to support traditional foods and help modernize them, such as more lentils, millets, vegetables, lean protein, fewer processed carbs and oils, and basically acknowledge the history of South Asians as real health issues, not just personality issues, especially if they've endured large amounts of stress and migration history, for instance. So When physicians understand our history, they can treat us with precision, not assumptions, and prevention gets a lot more effective.
Do you recommend any supplements?
Um, yes, I actually take as a supplement, I take vitamin D. I get it checked beforehand because we live in a temperate climate where there's much less sun exposure than would be otherwise, especially if you're in the diaspora. And you'll often find that I was surprised to find this. My vitamin D level when I first got it checked was at the critically low level.
Mine too.
Uh, and that's an easy thing that you can improve. I also, as part of traditional Ayurvedic medicine, there's psyllium husk. It's a
Yeah.
fiber supplement. I take it every day. It's actually really good for your cholesterol and great for supplementing your fiber intake. And 100% of it is from India, by the way. It's grown in Rajasthan. It was a traditional food. And we just need to go back to our roots. This is, one way of doing that.
It's so hard, especially if you live in if you got McDonald's across the street and you've got fast food everywhere and you have a community that's kind of behind in this kind of knowledge because when you go to other people's houses, they don't want to change. So they're
Yeah.
offering you things that you don't want to eat and you're trying to resist, but you're just putting it. It's hard to say no to an auntie that just keeps stuffing food in your face and putting it in your plate and just making a big scene and like, why don't you eat? You're getting just, it's just, anyways, healing from our history, right? You've mentioned it a few times, but let's
Mhm.
really get into it. Like, what is it? How does one heal from their history, both physically and emotionally?
Yeah. So, healing from your history means we didn't just get here by accident.
Yeah.
Um, our bodies and our emotions, they really carry echoes of what our ancestors lived through. And it has implications on our current health, our history. Famine, displacement, colonization, migration, all the survival stress that we endured shapes how we metabolize our food or how we process our food inside our bodies, how we store fat, how we respond to stress, and even how comfortable we are expressing emotion or resting. It means that inheritance with awareness instead of shame. We need to embrace our history and our heritage, knowing that, this is part of us, that this is why we're different, and use that as a basis to improve our health and be extra careful with our bodies and understanding that this is why we have to be careful. And that's, like physically, it could mean like nourishing instead of crash dieting, building muscle and walking after meals, sleeping deeply, choosing whole foods over processed foods, screening early for health and being proactive, emotionally, allowing yourself rest without guilt, breaking the silence about stress, trauma, and mental health. Um, you know, Building community, not isolating yourself, giving our children emotional safety. It's understanding that our biology was built for survival, and we need to give it permission to thrive. It's not just, I want to understand our past, but it's not just about dwelling on the past. It's really about honoring the resilience that we inherited and allowing our bodies to survive. It's basically to understand our history so it can allow us to transform ourselves to being healthy, strong, and having the right tools for the next generation.
Yeah. Sleep is by far the hardest to do.
Yes, sleep is hard, but you got to focus. I mean, there's so many distractions that we endure uh, that occur in our daily lives, but we
Yeah.
need to really push ourselves to resist these temptations because sleep is so crucial and restful sleep. And also, by the way, I would say this as an aside, South Asians are twice as likely to have a condition called sleep apnea because of the accumulation of fat inside certain areas that are sensitive to that result in snoring. if you do have the syndrome of sleep apnea where you're tired during the daytime, you're sleepy during the daytime, you're waking up not rested despite an adequate amount of sleep, you need to get tested for sleep apnea, and there's an easy treatment for it that can really transform your life.
Anything else you want to add? Any other advice before we call it a day?
Huh. I just would wish that governments and health organizations would do differently for South Asians. Um, we're not just a subset of the population. We have unique biological and historical risk factors that required some tailored strategies. Right now, most guidelines assume that everyone responds to food, to exercise, and stress the same way, but we don't. I mean, you mentioned sugar, for instance, totally different physiology for sugar. We need earlier and more specific screening guidelines that we talked about, like, hemoglobin A1C, lipoprotein, small a, lipid levels, homocysteine, C-reactive protein. Don't just wait for diabetes to show up on a routine A1C during your middle age. And secondly, public health messaging should support traditional diets over Western processed food. Um, we should be promoting strength training, post-meal walking instead of the generic 150 minutes of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually need more exercise, more moderate intensity exercise, like I mentioned earlier, than the 150 minutes per week. Third, I think we should get some culturally grounded. We need it. I mean, we need culturally grounded mental health support that understands the prior traumas that we've have endured and reduce the stigma around the emotional expression or talking about mental health. And then I think we need research specifically for or on South Asians instead of relying on data from European populations and assuming it applies. Our communities deserve guidelines built for our biology, not borrowed from someone else's. There was a study that was recently done on 100 patients of South Asian origin in the emergency room who are actively having heart attacks. And huge numbers of these patients who were actively having a heart attack, they scored low on their coronary risk profiles. Their ASCVD low risk profiles for their heart disease risk was low. It means something's wrong with
Hmm.
these ways to judge risk. And it needs to be adjusted for South Asian populations because there was no South Asians included in these studies where they determined how to determine risk. um, And so, in short, recognize our history, respect our physiology, and design prevention around who we really are. Uh, Prevention is what's necessary to save lives. So, the reason I wrote this book was as SNU kind of experienced this, having a heart attack at a young age. Uh, I always thought, I saw a lot of other people in our community having stents put in and having diabetes. I always thought, well, that's because they're being unhealthy.
Yeah, same
And
here.
I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna be okay because I'm trying to be healthy, unlike them. And it was a rude awakening. It actually was a huge shock when I had a massive heart attack. And I couldn't believe it. In fact, I didn't even believe it in the emergency room when the first thing they did is gave me a baby aspirin. I said, no, this is unbelievable. I'm not even having the right symptoms, by the way. It was kind of scary. I wasn't having the classic symptoms of, crushing chest pain radiating into your left arm. I was just not feeling good. I felt, anxious, but it was because I'd worked out. I thought I was dehydrated. And I just thought I just needed some intravenous hydration in the emergency room. It was a big shock to me when they told me I was having a heart attack. Um, so that tells you something, but
Yeah.
as a physician, I just didn't suspect it. And anyways, it was kind of like led me to question, like, if I'm trying to be healthy and I thought I was healthy, and as a physician, imagine non-physicians, who are less aware of what it means to try to be healthy. And then I started thinking, if it's something that you can, easily, it's not happening to everyone, the other ethnicities, it's happening to South Asians. Why is it? And I knew that in evolution, something that often predisposes a population to some health condition was in fact a survival strategy in other different environments. It's called environmental or evolutionary mismatch is the term.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, there's got to be an evolutionary mismatch for South Asians that would explain why we're in this predicament of having a health crisis when we're trying to be healthy and we're thin and we just don't look like everyone else, around us who's having the same problems, but they actually look like they're unhealthy. Um, and that's when I started learning about, I came across a paper in Nature, which is the highest science journal, about the Great Chinese Famine and how the people who were survivors of famine were their children and their grandchildren were predisposed to heart disease and diabetes and pre-diabetes. And that's when I felt like that was a smoking gun because as soon as I looked through the history of South Asia, immediately became apparent that there were countless famines. And it's like a huge spike under colonial rule. And it totally made sense. Everything made sense at that point. And that's
Amazing.
why I felt like this is such a hidden part of our history. It's even if you go to South Asia and you read the history books that's taught in these countries, they hardly mention famines. In fact, it's almost never mentioned. I mean, there's something called the NSERT. It's not even mentioned that there were these gigantic, catastrophic, geographic, huge famines that were unprecedented in history before or since during colonial rule. And I just felt like people need to be aware of this to understand what's going on with their health today. And I felt like compelled to write about this. And that's why I wrote this book. And it was so eye-opening. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe how egregious these colonizers were and what they did. Completely ruthless. Completely, they ran these, South Asia as if it was purely a cash crop plantation. No regard to the population. I mean, no reason to educate South Asians who were previously had a public education system, by the way. It was dismantled so that only a very tiny, tiny minority were educated.
Wow.
Illiteracy was rampant under colonial rule. Life expectancy plummeted. I mean, people were dying. It was just a horrible, very, very little was spent on hospitals and healthcare.
I've done so much research on colonialism and the colonialism hangover, the legacy of it and how it affects us today. Never in a million years did I imagine that it affects us biology wise and genetically
Yeah.
and just insane. Now when I read famine, it's crazy. Now when I look at Prince Charles wearing a crown, it's tied to my heart condition. It's just
Yes, I
fascinating.
mean, people don't realize that at least and this is probably an underestimate, at least $66 trillion in 2020 dollars was extracted out of South Asia. It was one of the greatest if not the greatest transfer of wealth in history. It's what's allowed the Industrial Revolution to be funded,
Yeah.
basically, in the rest of the world. I should say in Europe in particular.
We have a long way to heal. Yeah, thank you so much. This was very eye-opening and very important, and I hope we can do more of this. I think there's more information to learn, and there's more things to learn, and I hope you come back and we can do more.
Yes, and I would also encourage people to follow my Instagram page. We do have a lot of good, relevant content for South Asians and health regarding health, and even this unique history that we have to be aware of it.
Let them know your Instagram name.
Yes, it's Desi Doc at Desi Doc dot MD. We have pages in Instagram, Facebook, and also TikTok.
I'll tag you in there so people can see.
I appreciate it. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
and that's it.
Appreciate it. Thanks.